At the beginning of this legislature, we ask God's blessing upon the province of Alberta and upon the Legislative Assembly now convened. We give thanks for all who have served before us in this House, and we pledge ourselves in the service of the province. Amen. Members of the Assembly, it's a very unique occasion for some of our members to get so involved in the life of the province that they then rush out and give birth to a baby. So on this day, I'm sure that members of the Assembly would join me on your behalf in wishing well to the member for Edmonton Glengarry and his wife on the birth of their son David, who was born on this day.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased as my very first action as a member of this Legislative Assembly to present a petition signed by 939 Albertans, and they hereby petition the Legislative Assembly as follows: to restore to Albertans their traditional right of free and unhindered access to the shores and waters of Ghost Lake via the Crown-owned land recently leased to Bar E&H Ranches Limited.
Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly 21 students from the grade 6 class at John Paul First School in the Edmonton Mill Woods constituency, which I have the pleasure to represent, and they are here this morning in the public gallery. I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of this House.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 24 grade 6 students from St. Clement's School in the constituency of Edmonton Avonmore with their teacher, Mr. Clementanis. I would like to thank their teacher and your students for coming here today to come and see how the democratic process works. I would ask that you rise and receive a warm welcome from this Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce a group from a new part of my constituency. They came into the Chinook constituency as a result of redistribution, and it's a 4-H group from Craigmile and Delia, accompanied by, I knew I would get a bit of a draw on that, accompanied by 9 interested adults, which is unusual, and because they are new to me, or some of them are new to me, I want to read the names of the 9, not the 34 4-H people, but the 9 adults, headed by Sandra Smythe, and we have Art Hoover, Art Bergman, Bev Bergman, Alex Nagy, Stan Marshall, Lynn Gordon, Laurie Lee Marshall, and Elaine Smythe. I would invite them to stand and receive the welcome of the House.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor today to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 14 grade 10 students from John Paul II School in Fort Saskatchewan. They're accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Reg Wolfley, and they're seated in the members' gallery. I'd like them to rise and receive the recognition of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Premier, and of course.
The opposition. I do have a statement to read to the House before we commence oral question period, if you'd be good enough to wait for half a moment. Thank you. And I hope that the Assembly won't mind if we wait another half moment, because in the matter of getting the statement prepared for distribution, and since I was willing to distribute it to the House leaders of all parties, somewhere along the line someone forgot to give one to me to read to you. I told you yesterday there would be laughter in the Assembly, so we've had it. I hope I put you all at ease, all new members, for when you have to rise the first time. The new party structure of the House has necessitated a review of some of our practices relating to question period and ministerial statements. I have consulted the leaders and House leaders of all parties represented in the Assembly and have determined that the following practices will be followed for the time being to ensure fairness between all members and parties. Question period. In oral question period, number 1, the first question and up to 3 supplementary questions may be asked by the leader of the official opposition, or in his absence, the official opposition House leader, or in the absence of both of them, by a delegate. Second, the second question also, and up to 3 supplementary questions may be asked by the leader of the official opposition or his delegate. Item 3, the third question and up to 3 supplementary questions may be asked by the leader of the Liberal Party, or in his absence, the Liberal House leader, or in the absence of both of them, by a delegate. Item 4, the fourth question and up to 3 supplementary questions may be asked by the leader of the Representative Party, or in his absence, his delegate. In each case, once the original question and up to 3 supplementary questions have been asked, the opportunity for 1 further supplementary question will be given to the first person recognized by the Speaker from each of the remaining 3 parties in an order determined by the Chair. Once the first 4 questions and subsequent supplementary questions have been dealt with, the Chair will then recognize members from all parties in the Legislative Assembly in a fair and representative manner. In each case, the member recognized by the Chair will have the same opportunity to ask his or her question, along with up to 3 supplementary questions. In addition, the opportunity to ask 1 supplementary question will be available to 1 member in each of the other parties. With regard to oral questions, I draw the attention of members to Beauchene's 5th edition, citation 357, which summarizes the traditional restrictions on both written and oral questions, and to citation 358, which deals specifically with oral questions and answers. Citation 358 provides that, and I quote, number 1, oral questions should A, be asked only in respect of matters of sufficient urgency and importance as to require an immediate answer. B part, not inquire whether statements made in a newspaper are correct. C, not require an answer involving a legal opinion. D, not be asked in respect of a matter that is sub judice. Section E, not to be of a nature requiring a lengthy and detailed answer. F, not raise a matter of policy too large to be dealt with as an answer to a question. And number 2, answers to questions should be as brief as possible, should deal with the matter raised, and should not provoke debate. With regard to ministerial statements, ministerial statements are not a normal part of the procedure of the House, but are recognized in the daily routine. The Speaker has traditionally set limits on participants to keep contributions brief and factual. This is referred to in Beauchesne Citation 262. The traditional opportunity of response by the Leader of the Official Opposition, or in his absence, the Official Opposition House Leader, will be continued, but a 3-minute time limit will be applied to the response. The government has agreed that, where possible, it will minimize the amount of time taken for ministerial statements on private members' days. A copy of this statement will be delivered immediately to all members, and I wish to thank those of you involved in developing this consensus.
Mr. Speaker, I'll try again. My question to the Premier, and of course it has to do with the meat packing crisis, which is tearing this province apart. I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, that the labor laws are have allowed an irresponsible employer to deliberately try to beat and bust a legitimate union. My question to the Premier is simply this. Has the Premier personally contacted his Conservative friend, Mr. Pocklington, and told him to get back to the bargaining table in no uncertain terms, and if not, why not?
Mr. Speaker, the answer to the first question is no. And to the second question, Mr. Speaker, the answer is that the Honourable Minister of Labour is handling that matter.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier then. Does the Premier not admit that this labour dispute is unlike any that we've had before, and with the potential to tear this province apart? Does the Premier not think that he has a responsibility to personally intervene in this dispute?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister of Labour is dealing with the dispute in a very measured and responsible way, and he keeps me and members of our Cabinet and caucus fully up to date.
Supplementary question. Flowing from that answer, Mr. Speaker, is the Premier saying that at no time is he going to personally intervene in the strike, no matter how bad it gets?
No.
Mr. Speaker, what would cause the Premier?
Question and 3 supplementaries. Thank you. Supplementary.
That's 2. That's 2, Mr. Speaker.
I apologize, but I'll review it on the VCR later in the day. I recognize the Leader of the Representatives.
Supplementary question to the Premier. Is it the intention of the Premier to intervene on behalf of either the employees or the employers in terms of this strike in any way?
Mr. Speaker, obviously any intervention by the government would be along the lines of trying to make sure that we can bring a solution to the problem, and that is what would guide us in every case. It may be, Mr. Speaker, that the Honourable Minister of Labour may wish to add to these answers.
Mr. Speaker, I feel I should supplement the answers of the Honourable Premier and perhaps briefly review the current situation in relation to both the situation at Fletcher's in Red Deer and at the Gaynors plant in Edmonton, since there are 2 disputes going on concurrently. The Fletcher's dispute, currently there are negotiations proceeding in Vancouver. These negotiations involve discussions with the union representatives for both the Fletcher's plants in Vancouver and in Red Deer. Those negotiations are in progress. They are in another jurisdiction, and I understand the direct face-to-face negotiations without the use of a mediator, but I could be corrected on that point. With regard to the gainers dispute, there is, of course, the Disputes Inquiry Board, which is currently functioning. That is a neutral body appointed just a short time ago. The intention of that board is to hold its meetings in public. That will be a review that will be available to the public on an ongoing basis. And this morning, there are meetings scheduled for negotiations to continue between the gainers management and the representatives of the UFCW.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, yesterday thousands of Albertans have demonstrated their concern with jobs in this province, not just the meatpacking industry. Can the Premier assure the House that an independent commission to review the labour legislation of this province will be appointed, and in action within 5 days, with the instructions to report back to the House within 30 days?
Mr. Speaker, it's an interesting suggestion. It isn't something I can assure the House about, but it's something we'd certainly think about.
Opposition, please.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess I'll go into another part and ask if I can get one more supplementary after, if it's checked, on the one that I missed. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Agriculture, flowing around the same dispute and the impact on the hog industry. Mr. Speaker, the provincial labor laws have caused victims in this situation, namely the hog producers. I'm sure the Minister would agree. My question is to the Minister, because of the cost of some $280,000, has the Minister considered introducing a program to compensate producers for their losses on shipments outside the province until this dispute is settled?
Mr. Speaker, in response to the Leader of the Official Opposition, let me indicate to him that I am in contact on a daily basis with the Pork Producers Council so that I can be kept informed as to the difficulties they are facing. But let me share with him the best compensation we could offer not only to the hog producers, but to everybody concerned, is to make sure there is a rational and fair-minded discussion to attempt to bring back labor and management to the table so that we can resolve this situation, much like the Honourable Minister of Labour is attempting to do, and I would encourage all of us to support the reasonable methods he has brought forward so that we can resolve this situation rather than inflame it the way some members opposite have been attempting to do.
This minister may be a rookie. This is not the House of Commons. My question is, it's the labor laws of this province that have caused this dispute. My question had to do with his department. Is his ministry prepared to offer some subsidies to hog producers for this unusual dispute that's been caused by the provincial labor laws in this province?
Mr. Speaker, I indicated to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition that we were in daily contact with those individuals that are directly affected. We are looking to them for recommendations as to how they best see we should deal with this, but I underscore what I said earlier. We are going to take into consideration the serious impact that this is having on our hog industry.
Supplementary question to the Minister. It's nice that you're in contact. That's good that you understand you should at least do that. My question is specifically, during this session, will there be announcement of any programs to help the hog producers, especially if this is a protracted dispute?
Mr. Speaker, it's well noted the support that this government has given on a consistent basis to the agricultural sector, more so than any other provincial government in Canada, and I can assure the Honourable Leader of the Opposition that this government will hold true to its commitment to agriculture and to the hog industry so that they will not be hurt by a circumstance outside of their own control.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. Talk is cheap. I asked specifically then, could the Minister outline what contingency plans that he has and bring it and tell us at this Assembly what they're prepared to do in this strike for the hog producers?
Mr. Speaker, we have recognized on a consistent basis that talk is cheap. And let me share with the Leader of the Opposition that we are looking forward to receiving representations from those who are directly affected themselves prior to coming forward with any recommendations to ensure that we react the way that they would like us to react.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Honourable Minister of Agriculture. Would the Minister, in his considerations of subsidies to the hog producers in terms of fighting in the strike or intervening in the strike, be an act of intervention by government in the collective bargaining process, which to me is wrong?
Mr. Speaker, I missed the drift of the question. Would the Honourable Member mind?
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Honourable Minister. Would the Minister, in considering the request of the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition for subsidies to the hog industry, which would assist the hog industry during the strike, deem that act as an act of intervention by government in the collective bargaining process that is going on between the hog producers of this province and gainers?
Mr. Speaker, that is one area that we have to give full consideration to when we are examining exactly what we will do.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Agriculture, who's indeed proven to be about as slippery as the proverbial greased pig, but a simple yes and no to the Minister of Agriculture. Simple yes and no. It costs about $25 a hog for a hog producer to deliver his hog to an alternate source. Will the Minister say yes or no whether you recompense or reimburse a hog producer for that $25 extra cost for any hogs that will be marketed between now and when the strike is settled?
Mr. Speaker, might I thank the Leader of the Liberal Party for his question and commend the Leader of the Liberal Party for selecting such an excellent critic as it relates to agriculture, because it has been relayed to me that the critic for the Liberal Party has come as close to a farm as his pair of cowboy boots. But let me also indicate to him that the figures that we have is that it varies anywhere from $10 to $30 per hog that it is costing hog producers with this present situation, and we have to take all costs into accord when we do analyze as to what we are going to do. But again, I stress, as I mentioned to the Leader of the New Democratic Party, that we wish to have representations made by the sector that is directly affected prior to taking any action.
Chair recognizes the Leader of the Liberal Party.
This question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Premier. A large number of meatpacking plants in Alberta have closed or reduced operations in the past, say, dozen years in the province, resulting in the loss of many Alberta jobs. We might say we've been diversifying out of meatpacking. Has the Premier inquired about the economic viability of the Gainers and Fletcher's plants as to whether they will be able to assure Albertans in the House whether there's any current danger that either plant will cease operations as a financial results?
Mr. Speaker, that is actually one of the matters that the Disputes Inquiries Board will be determining information on, and we should find it quite interesting.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Many meatpacking jobs have been lost to Quebec, which subsidizes the meat industry heavily. Is there any action going to be taken by the government to reestablish the natural advantages we have here in Alberta to regain lost jobs and prevent the loss of more in the meatpacking industry?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and the Minister of Agriculture will be dealing with that in the future. I might say, Mr. Speaker, that one matter that has concerned me a great deal about the loss of packing plants and jobs is the recent comments from a leader of union out of Toronto saying that he thought he might have to sacrifice this one in Alberta. And I thought, Mr. Speaker, that was hardly representing the people, the workers, or the people of Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, the government has announced a diversification into technology where we don't have natural advantages, especially with the cutback in funding to education. And we've ignored the meat processing where we have advantages to diversify in the meat packing. Can you give anything more specific, as I noticed Saskatchewan is talking about taking on some of our meat packing industry. Have we had any consultation with the meat packers on how they could expand what they're already doing?
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Agriculture could deal with that matter.
Comment?
Mr. Speaker, that is one of the areas that is presently under consideration, and this government, as it always has done, will proceed very actively in that area.
The Leader, the Representative? No. Other question? Okay.
Speaker, does the government, and I direct it either to the Premier or the Minister for Agriculture, not feel that the near monopoly situation, which was described by the Honourable member for Westlock, Sturgeon Westlock, yeah, take your pick, feel that because there is a near monopoly situation and because a third party is hurting, that there should be extra pressure on this government and that the government should respond to that pressure to solve this very sad dispute that is the result of the poor labor laws of this province, and that we can't sit around and wait for a long inquiry.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Minister of Labour said earlier, the government is moving in a variety of ways to try and solve this dispute, and we hope that all honourable members will want to participate in finding the solutions.
The Chair recognizes the Leader of the Representative Party.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Agriculture, and it's with regards to the Alberta Farm Credit Stability Program. Could the Minister indicate what the source of funds will be for that program? Will it be the Heritage Savings Trust Fund or the AAA rating of the province of Alberta? And how will the funds be transferred to the various lending agencies in the province of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, as was the commitment in the speech from the throne, we are going to get this program on stream very, very quickly, but I would think that a supplementary would best be answered by the provincial treasury as it relates to the specific funding question.
Speaker, first of all, let me give the assurance to the farming community that this program will be delivered, and the commitment as outlined both before the election and in the speech from the throne will be delivered and on time. I hesitate somewhat, Mr. Speaker, to go into many of the details about the program because, frankly, with respect to the bank and the financing, that has not quite been struck yet. However, a quick review of the financial position of this province shows that the Heritage Fund in particular is in very good liquidity position, and we could, if necessary, draw down on the short-term basis some of those money to ensure the program is up and running. But our commitment, Mr. Speaker, is to make sure the program is going, followed quickly by the small business program, and both of those will be underway just as soon as possible.
Speaker, supplementary question to the provincial treasurer then. Could the provincial treasurer indicate whether the program will be an interest buy-down program, or will it be the transferring of government funds, whatever the source may be, into the various lending agency who in turn make arrangements with the farmers or small businessmen?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the Premier outlined during the election campaign and as was tabled in this House before April the 10th, 1986, we have and intend to use the financial institutions to deliver the program wherever possible, and that, of course, would include banks. I can only say, in terms of contemplating a way in which we could fund the program, is that if the particular bank or credit union or treasury branch was to advance money, we would also advance money to the treasury branch based on that loan amount, and therefore, in the normal banking situation, the spread which they work on would allow the bank comfort in terms of the rate of return and provision for revenue for the services provided.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the provincial treasurer. Could the provincial treasurer indicate what that spread may be at the present time and what requests the various institutions are making to government in terms of their cost of administration?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to preempt, of course, the ongoing discussions which are before us, because of course that would be one of the essential arguments or debating points in terms of what the cost will be to the government. But I can assure you that both parties will try to arrive at a reasonable arrangement so that, number one, there is some rate of return for the banking system for those services, and secondly, so that the program is up and running in a normal financial sense. And that's our commitment. I think the honourable leader understands that it's difficult for me to give absolute details because those are still under negotiation.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Honourable Provincial Treasurer, has the government assessed their approach that they are using versus the interest buy-down approach?
Yes, again, Mr. Speaker, I think our position is clear on that. This program is not an interest subsidy program as such. The intention of this program is to use the fairly substantial resources of this province, its economic strengths, the resources of the Heritage Fund and the General Revenue Fund, and to build on that strength to allow farmers to achieve long-term credit stability. And if long-term credit is achieved by the farming sector, then of course that would not be an interest buy-down, but a provision of a secure rate of interest for a long period of time. And to my way of thinking, and certainly the government's position, that in itself is a significant addition to the farming community in terms of the input costs which all farmers are suffering, and which this government, as the Minister of Agriculture has pointed out, is doing an awful lot to assist.
Minister, excuse me, the Leader of the Liberal Party. Question, followed by the member for Vegreville.
Provincial Treasurer, the rate that's been quoted most commonly is 9% or lower. As the Provincial Treasurer talked, and he mentioned he was going to use financial institutions, about the possibility, as it happens in many non-agricultural industries, where the banks or financial institutions can loan money at half prime plus one. In other words, the 5%, if it's a troubled company. And surely under this government there's nobody more troubled than the farmers. And can't you get that rate that is half prime plus one rather than the rather exorbitant rate of 9%? Have you done any talking or investigation with the banking industry on that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, we, as usual, are always reviewing the rate situation. Unfortunately, the interest rates are trending down. We're looking at a variety of options available to us in these negotiations. And as I noted before, we will use the resources of this government to ensure that the best rate is passed on and flows through to the farming community. And that's our commitment.
Member for Vegreville, supplementary.
I'd like to supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Provincial Treasurer. I think the farmers of Alberta require a more clear indication of just what the rate will be. Conspicuous by its absence from the throne speech yesterday was reference to the actual rate. Can we therefore assume that 9% is the rate, or will you be trying to come up with a more reasonable and helpful rate?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member from Vegreville, of course, raises an important point, and that is in the same context of what will the rate be, and I've attempted to deal with that. I don't think we're going to change the speech from the throne between yesterday and today, and at this point, at least, the 9% rate does stand.
I hesitate to correct a member who's been so long in the House, but I think that's appropriate an effort as any to remind the Minister that to refer to the other members as being the member for rather than the member from. The Chair recognizes the member for Wainwright, followed by the member from for St. Albert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Agriculture. The Grain Transportation Authority has reported to Federal Transport Minister Don Mazankowski on the method of payment of the Crow benefit issue. And I understand that the report's recommendations have concluded that pay the producer instead of the railway is the way to proceed in the future. Can the Minister confirm this, and what is his reaction to the report?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I respond to the member for Wainwright and indicate to him that this morning at 9:30 our time in Winnipeg, this report was released, the report by the Grain Transportation Agency, which reviewed the Western Grain Transportation Act. And the highlight of the report indicated that there would be a payout made by way of an annuity to the farming population. That is very supportive of the position of this government and that this government has consistently taken. We're delighted with that report, and we do indicate our support for it, but we place one caveat on it in that we have not had an opportunity yet to thoroughly review the report and after we have done that, we will give a full report to the House.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. What will happen to our Alberta Feed Grain Adjustment Program if the federal government adopts pay-the-producer method of payment?
Mr. Speaker, we had indicated at the time that we introduced that program that in the event that the method of payment was changed, we would reassess our position as to the payout to the farming population. I should indicate to the House that in excess of $40 million has been paid out to the farming population under that present provincial program.
No further supplementaries. Chair recognizes the member for Vegreville.
Supplementary to the Minister of Agriculture. Does the Minister recognize that there is still considerable disagreement over this issue in the farming community? I think all of this is brought about because of the government's weak-kneed response to the Crow debate of some years ago. Are you prepared to listen to the views of producer organizations that still support the Pay the Railways option?
Mr. Speaker, in response to the member for Vegreville, may I indicate to him at the outset that I will not only listen to the viewpoints expressed by the various commodity groups in agriculture and the agricultural representatives themselves, but I'm also more than happy to listen to his representations, as I indicated to him when we had the opportunity to meet on a personal basis a few days ago, and I look forward to not only working closely with individuals within the agricultural sector, but also with all members in this House. I should indicate to him, too, that a study was conducted by our department which showed 70% of the farming population in favor of this government's position.
Supplementary, the member for Vegreville? No. Is this a supplementary question, Leader of the Liberal Party?
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Agriculture, you mentioned a study that showed that the farmers were in favor of what you of your policy. Could you tell me where that study is, or could you reveal it to the House?
Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure the honourable member opposite will appreciate, if he's going through the same adjustments that I am as a new member of this chamber, we have both gone through so many briefing notes that I will attempt to dig that study up, yes, but as he can appreciate, as I'm sure all new members can, we've gone through such a thorough briefing process that it might take me a period of time to locate the specific paper that I did read it on.
The extraneous comment, thank you. The chair recognizes the member for St. Albert, followed by the member for Red Deer North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is directed, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Labour. And what I want to ask is what policy considerations have prevented the Minister from directing the Labour Relations Board to investigate whether or not Gainers has committed unfair labour practices, and is he allowed to, under Section 141 of the Labour Relations Act, investigate that complaint?
Mr. Speaker, as yet I have not received any complaint regarding that matter.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a minister stating to this House and working Albertans that Section 141 of the Labour Act, and I might read it.
I think just the reference.
Subject, and Section 141 of the Labour Act reads, complaint of unfair labour practices.
If you could just give it briefly and to make your supplementary point, please.
To the House that he has no authority under the Labour Relations Act as any other person to investigate this complaint.
The minister believes he's answered it with the previous answer. Chair recognizes the member for Red Deer North. I'm sorry, you do have a, sorry, apologize, final supplement. No, you have one more supplementary.
Answer the question? Then I'd ask him another question, a supplementary. What is a policy of the government with regard to public promises by employers involved in labor disputes that they will never sign collective agreements, and refusals by employers to enter negotiations or placement of ads for replacement workers prior to the end of a collective agreement?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member wishes to make that an official complaint, then I can refer it to the Labour Relations Board quite willingly. The situation is that I have not had any attribution of the advertisements that were placed, other than very indirect ones through the media, which of course should not be an indication for asking questions in this House. The honourable member is bringing matters here which he could well bring to my office or send me a memo and officially request an investigation, and I invite him to do that.
Final supplementary.
Might I ask the Minister if he is willing, as the Minister of Labour, the most top spot in Alberta in regards to labour relations in the province of Alberta, that he doesn't think he has a moral responsibility as a Minister of Labour to make investigation himself to see that justice and fairness is carried forward?
Mr. Speaker, in spite of Section 358 of Buchanan, I think the honourable member has entered into debate, and I'm entitled to respond to that. Referring to the disputes at Fletcher's and Gaynors, the Labour Act of this province is not responsible for those disputes. Those disputes are normal labour relations matters where there is a difference of opinion between the employer's agents and the employee's agents subsequent to the expiry of the previous contract. Those are normal matters in the labour relations field. The role of the government so far has been an active one. One strike started at 12:01 on Sunday. The other strike started at 12:01 on Monday. By Wednesday evening, which is a very short time in the course of any labour dispute, it became apparent there might be a window for the government to get involved at a very early stage. That window occurred on Thursday, and we took the opportunity of entering that window after I had consulted with the Premier, and he encouraged me to use that window. We started, in the case of the Gaynors dispute, which is the one that the honourable member directly addressed, we started a process of getting representatives of the union and the management of Gaynors together. Those meetings occurred on Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday of last week. Those meetings occurred as a result of the initiatives of this government, and once it became apparent that that process, those initial meetings, had come to a standstill, further discussions were held on the Monday. As a result of those discussions, both with the union and the management side, it was possible at approximately 11 p.m. on Monday to get the two sides together for negotiations, and I use that word advisedly, as dollar amounts and overtime considerations were discussed. That process broke up at 3:10 on Tuesday morning. I made a recommendation to Cabinet and to Caucus. As a result of that recommendation, our Caucus approved the recommendation I put to them that we appoint a Disputes Inquiry Board. That Disputes Inquiry Board, Mr. Alex Dubinsky has a 30-year experience in labour matters. He has decided that he is going to investigate, he's going to inquire into the matters under dispute. He will get the facts of those matters, including the economics involved in this industry. As a result of that process, we will have the facts that are required, and those meetings he has agreed to hold in public, not in camera. If I may just briefly finish, Mr. Speaker, since this is a debate.
Order. If we're to be held down, we should not have speeches from the opposite bench.
Thank you, Minister.
Briefly finish. There are currently, as of 15 minutes...
Minister, I think I would ask you to sit. Perhaps it might come up with a supplementary from the part of the House. Are there further supplementaries on this question? I'm sorry, you've had your one plus the 3 supplementaries on this issue for today. Thank you. Chair recognizes the member for Red Deer North. The member for Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, a question to the Minister of Labour, which he's partially addressed. In view of the rapidity of changes in the situation regarding the strike specifically at Fletcher's in Red Deer, does the Minister have any further information so that I can update and respond to my constituents there specifically?
Mr. Speaker, I've partly addressed that already in that the dispute at Fletcher's There have been negotiations started in Vancouver. There was a press release put out by the chairman of the board of Fletcher's 2 days ago in which he indicated the willingness of Fletcher's to get to the table. As a result of that press release, and perhaps because of the urgings of the government and my staff, negotiations are occurring in Vancouver at this time. Those negotiations started yesterday, I understand, and are continuing today. Since it's in another jurisdiction, I don't have direct information, but I'll get it to the honourable member as soon as I have it.
Additional supplementary, member for Red Deer North? No. All right, supplementary. Thank you. The member for.
Familiar with this. I beg your leave. Mr. Speaker, my question is directed to the Minister of Labour. I find it extremely odd, and I'm sure he must, that negotiations, why do negotiations have to start in Vancouver? Is it because they have a better Labour Relations Act in Vancouver than they have in Alberta, that we have to negotiate in Vancouver, in British Columbia, because we can't resolve problems here in Alberta?
Order, please. The member is out of order. With regard to supplementary questions, they're supposed to be brief. I think I'm running that you've now thrown in 3 supplementary questions. So one at a time, please. Thank you very much. Minister, respond.
Mr. Speaker, I understand the meetings are held in Vancouver because of the direct involvement of the National Union out of Toronto in this matter. They are involved both in the dispute in Red Deer and the negotiations to do with the Fletcher's plant in Vancouver, where I understand the previous agreement ran out on the 11th of April of this year. The involvement of national representatives in this dispute is, of course, quite normal in the labour relations field, and the Premier has already remarked upon it.
Supplementary, the member for Edmonton Goldbar.
The Minister of Labour, does the government have a policy for or are you contemplating a policy for reimbursing in whole or in part the expenditures that this city has undertaken in policing the situation that's been provoked by unfair labour legislation?
Mr. Speaker, that was a matter of debate, but the matter comes under the jurisdiction of the Solicitor General, and perhaps he wants to answer that question.
Mr. Speaker, policing is definitely under my jurisdiction. However, there is an agreement whereby our government provides a per capita grant to a municipality to conduct their own policing, and we have not had a request from the City of Edmonton for such participation.
Is this a supplementary question? Thank you.
The Solicitor General, has the Minister any ballpark figures?
The honourable member, forgive me, but that I'm afraid that on this particular question that the one supplementary from your party has already been taken by the member for St. Albert. So perhaps I'm going to recognize you later in the question period with respect to another issue, and perhaps a similar aspect of this same issue for all that the chair knows. So the chair feels that I must proceed to recognize the member for Edmonton Meadowlark, followed then by the member for Edmonton Beverly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a question of the provincial treasurer. Recently, Brendan Ventures Incorporated issued a prospectus, the first prospectus issued under the Alberta Stock Savings Plan. And in doing so, they were able to raise, I note this prospectus, in doing so, they were able to raise $365,000, of which only $55,000 will be invested directly in Alberta. The rest being invested, interestingly enough, in Ontario and in British Columbia. Will the Honourable Provincial Treasurer please explain, in keeping with the objectives of the Alberta Stock Savings Plan to create jobs and economic activity in this province, the level of job creation that this issue will stimulate in Alberta for Albertans?
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the statement made with respect to Alberta Stock Savings Plans. However, I will simply draw to the member's attention that that act has not been passed by the legislature, and therefore whatever prospectus has been issued under that act would seem to me not applicable.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I'm concerned that further issues are being contemplated under that Act, and that in fact Albertans are making commitments and expecting tax incentives that may or may not be there if that plan isn't structured properly. Incredibly, achieving the $55,000 of direct investment will cost Albertans I'm trying to explain it so that it can be understood properly across the way, $150,000 in foregone tax revenues. Could the minister please explain?
Are we now at the... Okay. Honourable member, we are now at the question, please. Okay, stick to the question.
Thank you.
Sure that the 50, but that won't happen.
Could the minister please explain the particular cost benefit of this rather lopsided investment formula that $150,000 will be spent?
Very much. Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, of course, anybody who wants to invest money in this province or invest money anywhere in Canada must recognize that that, of course, is the private sector choice. Now, if the member is suggesting that his party does not support the private sector choice, I'll take that as information. Yet it should be noted that, as I previously stated, that the Alberta Stock Savings Plan, Mr. Speaker, has not been passed by this Assembly, and therefore, on the context of that particular prospectus, his question essentially is out of order. But if you'd like to discuss macroeconomic investments in Western Canada, I'd be glad to do so through debate, but not in the question period, Mr. Speaker.
Are you saying that your prospectus is in order?
Order, please. Order, please. I'm sorry, any more questions on this subject I rule as being out of order because the minister is indeed correct that it's dealing with anticipated legislation in this House in this session, and therefore the chair has acted inappropriately. And could we then please go on to the next question as recognized? The member for Edmonton Beverley.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Is it the policy of this government that municipalities should be asked to bear the full policing costs for the disputes that have resulted from poor labor legislation?
Mr. Speaker, no, it's not a policy of this government, and if we are asked in some way to participate, we'll give it full consideration.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Well, has the Premier had any discussions with the Mayor of City of Edmonton to discuss the policing costs, estimated to be in $250,000 to the city, and are you prepared that you can share or at least relieve the costs to the city?
The answer is no, Mr. Speaker, I haven't.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Has the Premier given any consideration to reimbursing the city for the costs of the Gainers dispute and then attempting to regain the reimbursements for Mr. Poxington in the provincial courts?
Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, we haven't been requested. We haven't had any need to give consideration. It may well be that there are a variety of causes for the cost, and there might be a whole group of people that we might ask to participate in the funds.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Solicitor General. Has the Minister any ballpark estimates available on the cost to the province of the extra RCMP work at the strikes in Red Deer or at the strikes at Slave Lake and Fort McMurray?
Mr. Speaker, I do not have any estimate of the extra policing costs.
Additional supplementary. Okay. Chair recognizes the member for Calgary Buffalo.
Mr. Speaker, a question to the Honourable Minister of Energy. The government has spoken of the implementation of programs bolstering investor confidence, which will be a surprise to the oil industry. Might I ask how the minister conceives of a program ending September 30th of this year as inspiring investor confidence?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I assume that the honourable member from Calgary Buffalo is referring to the 3 programs that we recently announced to help in the short term, and it was emphasized during the announcements of the program that they were to give incentives to the industry for activity and jobs over the summer months. And by having a September 30th deadline for 2 of the programs, it's anticipated that the producers and companies would apply, and the work activity would occur over the summer months when, after the spring breakup, the activity traditionally hasn't been as great as it is later in the fall. So we're confident that the programs will be responded to and that we will see activity over the summer months.
How come he gets a supplement? Don't I?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're still on your supplementaries.
Yes,
Apologize.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister of Energy, who has used the words that the province is aware of, that the programs are short-term and stopgap. The problems of the industry have been obvious for 6 months. The question is, does the government have any plans for programs which are not short-term or stopgap, but which will rather reestablish true stability and investor confidence in the industry? Are we going to continue the government's program of praying for oil prices?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member would recall, I'm sure he does, that it was in the earlier part of this year, in April, when this government announced some $400 million in terms of assistance to the energy industry, in terms of exploratory drilling programs and royalty tax incentives. That was followed up, as I indicated a few seconds ago, by another $200 million worth of programs recently. Now, certainly, those programs are directed at increasing activity at a time when world oil prices are such that activity has slowed down considerably in this province and elsewhere. I've had recent meetings with representatives from the different umbrella organizations in the energy industry. I've heard a number of suggestions as to what government might do to work with the industry and with the federal government, what this government might do in working with the federal government and industry to address the long-term problems. And certainly I agree that it's important for us to be addressing the long-term situations at this time. We are hopeful that we will see a recovery of pricing in the later part of this year. It's anticipated that there'll be some fluctuations in the meantime. But my intention is to work with the industry and look at their proposals and work with them to try to address the long-term problems.
I'm sorry, the time for question period has expired. I had recognized that we would give one final supplementary down. I know that the member has one final supplementary and also the member for Forest Lawn. I wonder if the House would be agreeable to extend for those two very brief supplementaries, and the Chair gives due warning to both the two supplementary questions as well as to the responses, Honourable Minister, that they indeed be brief. Are you agreed?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A supplementary to the Honourable Minister of Energy, who has just advised the House that there are...
The question, please. Straight question.
The Minister referred to the short-term $400 million program, which was announced in March. $300 million of that program is for exploratory drilling in this province. Can the Minister tell the members of this House how many wells have been drilled pursuant to that exploratory program, and how much of the $300 million has been taken up in the intervening 3 months to date?
Honourable Member, you managed to slip in two supplementaries. The Minister may wish to respond to the first one briefly. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have the numbers available in terms of the take-up on the $300 million exploratory drilling program. However, I will say that that particular program has a deadline, if I recall, of December 31st of 1986. And the take-up hasn't been as much as I would hope to have seen at this particular time. However, it's anticipated that during the latter part of this month and over the summer months, we will see a greater take-up on that particular program.
Final question of the day, the member for Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Energy, given that the only solution to the problem of the Canadian sector of the oil industry would be to achieve price stabilization through a floor price, does the minister intend to consult with his party counterparts in Ottawa to achieve such a measure?
Mr. Speaker, it's my intention to consult with as many people as I can. And if the honourable member from Calgary Forest Lawn has any suggestions or ideas other than what his party has traditionally been giving over the last few months, I'd be welcome to hear those suggestions, as I would from the member from Calgary Buffalo. Certainly it isn't my intention to consult with the federal minister. In fact, we've already established a meeting for June the 27th in Vancouver.
Members of the Assembly, might we revert briefly to introduction of special guests? There's a number of groups.
Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and through you 26 grade 6 students from Our Lady of the Angel School in Fort Saskatchewan. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. John Robertson, parents Mrs. Hazel Parody, Mrs. Hood, and Mrs. Fung. They are in the public gallery, and I'd like them to rise and receive the recognition of the Assembly.
Pleasure, and I do it with great delight, to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Legislative Assembly a group of 44 students from Our Lady of Perpetual Help in Sherwood Park. I believe they're seated in the members gallery with their teachers Jim Zebart and Rock Richard, and I would ask them to rise so that they could receive a warm welcome from this Assembly.
On this, my first opportunity to speak in this Assembly, to introduce 27 energetic and enthusiastic students from the James Gibbons School in the constituency of Edmonton-Glenora. They are accompanied by their teacher, Laurie Balser, and parents Nancy Pope, Gary Ricks, and Jerome Yellowdirt. I would ask that they rise and receive the traditional welcome of the Assembly.
Orders of the day.